Hello, it's Bobby,
and Julia.
and today we're talking about dilated cardiomyopathy and how it relates to grain-free foods. So, back in June of 2018, Dr. Freeman wrote her first article about how boutique or grain-free diets cause heart disease called DCM. So, she claimed that it was related to diet, but also wrote, it's not clear if diet is causing the issue. She theorized that it was taurine deficiency because in cats, if you don't add taurine or have a naturally occurring taurine, then they'll get dilated cardiomyopathy because they can't synthesize cysteine and methionine into taurine like humans and dogs can.
Just to give you a little bit of background information, it's usually shortened to DCM instead of saying the whole word, and it's characterized by like an enlarging of the heart because the heart muscle is weak, and so you get like lethargy, and they can actually have like cardiac arrest and die.
So she cites it as being related to grain-free foods and exotic ingredients, which she later refers to things like salmon as exotic. I find it very short-sighted and kind of American bias because she says things like duck and kangaroo are exotic, but really it's just exotic to a North American.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of parts of the world, they do eat those meats. They have sufficient research, so it's kind of insensitive to me to disregard other countries' research just because it's not done in North America. She also says that it's marketing over science, that all these BEG, she calls them, boutique, exotic, and grain-free foods, are causing the problem because they don't have enough research done on them. The reality of the situation is that, for example, we got back-ordered at one point on Valence product because it was manufactured, sent for testing. The testing came back that it wasn't within the acceptable range for them. They sent it back, got a new product made. So that's a very small company that's testing every batch to make sure that it meets their standards. So it's not that a small company can't do science and they can't do research, they can't do like testing. That's just not the case.
And a lot of the time, these smaller companies actually do more testing because they do smaller batches.
And here she writes, if your dog is diagnosed with DCM and eating one of those diets, report it to the FDA. And so this is going to come back big time in a minute, but we wanted to do a bit of an analogy. So let's say a doctor came out and said, bananas cause cancer in women over 40. Every woman over 40 with cancer would wonder if it was caused by bananas. And they might call in and they might assume, and so bananas would get a rap for causing cancer in women over 40. What wouldn't be researched is how do bananas affect women under 40 or men? Or is it even causing the cancer? Or why?
It's just a loose analogy that doesn't have anything to back it up.
Yeah, so this one point here will cause a giant disparity in the statistics that are gathered. So after this, she wrote a American Veterinary Medical Association article along with a couple of her colleagues. The thing about this article is it's an opinion article.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people assumed that this was based on a study that they did, but that's not the case. There was no study involved with it. It's just the opinion of these veterinarians. And we're not going to go through the whole thing, but if you want to read it, we can link it in the description. The important part that we wanted to point out was, one, that they never give a justification as to why they think it's related to grains, and they also never give any theories or anything. It's just as simple as, well, grain-free foods cause heart disease. There's no evidence, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the acknowledgments, Dr. Freeman has received research support from Nestle Purina Pet Care and Royal Canin, has consulted with Nestle Purina, has given sponsored talks to Hill's Pet Nutrition and Nestle Purina. Within the past 3 years, Dr. Rush has received research support from Nestle Purina and Royal Canin, has consulted with Nestle Purina. Dr. Aiden has received research support from Nestle Purina.
Yeah, so all three of these veterinarians have received money from the big three companies that are sold at veterinary clinics. So it's they have a kind of a vested interest in this.
Yeah, and typically vet foods are very heavy into corn and byproducts and things like that. So you could see where they would want people to stop feeding grain-free diets, even though I don't think Royal Canin does, but the other two do make grain-free products. But you can see where they would have an interest in changing people's opinions. So after that, she writes another article, and this is the one that really went famous. She says here that her post has 2,000 page views a day. It was on the news. It was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So she points out here that most dogs being diagnosed with DCM do not have low taurine levels, which was the only theory that she put out there, was that it was taurine. And taurine just comes from meat. That's basically the only place you can get taurine. So it's irrelevant whether there's grain or not. It just, is there meat? Or what a lot of lower end foods will do is they'll just add it synthetically. So she says here, diet-associated DCM with taurine levels. While this form of the disease was first identified in dogs of breeds not predisposed to DCM, they are eating BEG diets. So she keeps saying there's no evidence, but it's because they eat BEG diets. I've talked to a couple people in the medical community that said if you were to write a medical article with no evidence like this, that there would be severe punishments and that you could lose your license and even be charged for writing something this slanderous without any supporting evidence.
Yeah, there's no studies, there's no statistics. It's just an opinion.
And this is a very interesting part. She says, has diet-associated DCM been seen in cats? And that it has only been reported in dogs so far. So once again, cats cannot produce their own taurine. So if it had anything to do with taurine, it would also be affecting cats, and in greater numbers.
Yeah.
It's also, it requires a very specific look into what could be the cause then, because why would it affect dogs and not cats?
Cats are a lot more susceptible to a number of different things, especially when it comes to nutrients, so it's a little bit weird that it would only affect dogs and not cats.
Yeah, so one of my big issues is that there's no because or anything along those lines. It's just a claim with nothing to substantiate it over and over again. So, because that first article said, call the FDA, the FDA put out what they meant to be a statement saying that they are looking into this and they are researching this. A lot of news outlets and vets took it as this is an issue that we're looking into. So, as you can see by this chart, you're getting 1 to 3 reports of DCM across dogs and cats per year until that article came out in 2018, and then you had 320 in 1 year. So, the realistic reason as to why it's any different from 2017 to 2018 is because people read an article.
Mm-hmm.
There's also
the statistics are a little bit are extremely skewed because if someone thought their dog died of dilated cardiomyopathy because of their diet, they included that.
Yeah, and they also said that golden retrievers were the most susceptible and really focused on golden retrievers, and golden retrievers are the most common breed. So you can once again see the correlation between the article and the information provided to the FDA. So the real important one here is dog food brands named most frequently. This was put up in vet clinics, this was shared all over the place as this is how many dogs were killed by these brands.
And I see all the time on Facebook groups because I follow a couple Newfoundland and Maine Coon groups and Golden Retriever groups, and they all say, don't feed these foods because they'll kill your dog.
Yeah, so that is not what these numbers are. These numbers are what foods were called in the most about. You'll notice on here that Hill's grain-free food isn't mentioned, Purina's grain-free food isn't mentioned.
There's no grain-free foods from grocery stores or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a couple, but not much. So there's another skewed number based on people who feed the low-quality foods are less likely to be reading articles and be calling in and be proactive.
Or just being able to afford getting that test done.
Yeah. So, I also want to show that right here, product testing, they did do testing on these foods that are listed and found no outlying nutrition, that there was nothing out of whack. So it all came back perfectly fine. And here's some examples of what constitutes a report. So this one, for example, is just somebody calling in and saying, my dog has eaten Earthborn Holistic Meadow Feast food for the past 5 years. He was diagnosed with. This one, sudden onset coughing, newfound heart murmur, heart significantly enlarged on chest x-rays, echo of heart shows DCM. So there's no actual research into if it was the food. For a good example, I'm going to give one that was done before. So here's an article, or a report from before that article. As you can see, it was Hill's prescription food that they're talking about, and this is actually a very detailed talking about ECGs, talking about other things that they gave, like baby carrots and treats.
The steps of trying to actually figure out what's wrong with the dog.
Yeah, so the ones Like, once again, this one actually had to be put on 2 pages because it took so much. These are great examples of a report. These are likely submitted by the veterinarian, and they were legitimately considering different variables. So reading those would be a great example for you of what a real report looks like. And then we have some on here that are just like, my dog died 10 years ago and I fed grain-free food. Well, there's not really any causation there.
Yeah, this is a really loose correlation.
So here we're going to show you, like, once again, the taurine issue. There was a study done back in 2003 on dogs that had DCM, and they found that they were all feeding a lamb and rice diet. So the reason for this would be that lamb is actually very low in cysteine and methionine and taurine. So in a food that's more rice than lamb, you're going to end up with really low levels of those 3 amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why dogs would be more likely to be taurine deficient in those cases. So there was a link 17 years ago to taurine deficiency and DCM with dogs. The thing is, it was with foods containing grains.
Yep.
So it's already been established that the grain-free aspect isn't the issue.
No.
So here we have the update. This one didn't really take off. No news outlets were picking it up, anything like this. So it's basically just says that the FDA did autopsies, they did their research, they didn't find anything. So in a lot of the cases, it wasn't even the right disease, that it was misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
They found no link to anything nutritional. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying DCM isn't a disease. It is.
It's actually extremely prevalent, but it's in like a bunch of different breeds. Like,
yeah.
A lot of even golden retrievers, they can be susceptible to it depending on their age.
And it's caused by diabetes, infections, a lot of different things like that, because it's an enlargement of the heart. It's usually not diagnosed as its own disease. It's usually part of congenital heart failure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as you can see, they did some necropsy. Basically,
they were trying to do their due diligence.
Yeah, they didn't find anything, and so that should have been more important than their "we're going to research" article, but it barely ever came out. And then in June of 2020, we finally got our first research article into if DCM is caused by grain-free foods. It's an extremely long article, so
they're thorough.
Yeah, they went through every variable that they could think of. As you can see, there's a lot of citations down there, and their only acknowledgement is that it's funded by BSM partners. So they say in their conclusion, recently a correlation between diets with specific characteristics such as but not limited to containing legumes, grain-free, novel protein sources and ingredients, and smaller manufactured brands to DCM has come under scrutiny by academic researchers and the FDA. The use of the acronym BEG and its association with DCM are without merit because there is no definitive evidence in the literature. At this time, information distributed to the veterinary community and the general public has been abbreviated synopsis of case studies with multiple variables and treatments, incomplete medical information, and conflicting medical data, and options from veterinary nutrition influencers. So basically what they're saying is nothing that has been said up to this point has been substantiated.
Mm-hmm.
And that
their
research finds that although it is a deadly condition that needs to be researched and focused on, that there is no link to whether or not the food has grain in it. I would say that there is a link to general nutrition. There's actually a study in humans where in 2 separate studies they were able to reverse DCM in humans by switching them to a strict vegan diet and exercise. I doubt it was directly linked to the fact that it was vegan. I think it was more just
better nutrition.
Yeah, like making
their health.
Making them healthier in general helped with their heart. So the reason that this whole DCM thing bothered me so much is I will give an example of a case that really got to me. We have a customer who has a dog that ever since he got his first flea medication, he's kind of out of it. He would pace up and down the fence,
chase his tail for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, just developed a lot of obsessive compulsive issues.
Definitely seemed like that something neurologically wrong with him.
And so after a couple of years, he was still really young, only I would say 3 or 4.
He's really young, yeah.
He started to kind of take a turn for the worse. And their vet said, "Oh, well, you feed a grain-free food, so it's DCM." Never really tried to figure it out. It was just because you feed grain-free food, and that's the flavor of the week, that's what it is.
So they just switched his food, basically.
Yeah, they put him on heart medication and switched his food. Well, he died a few months later, and when he died, he had blood coming out of his nose and ears. That would insinuate that it was a brain condition, and that the vet just never looked. And that's why these things bother me so much. People say, it affects the brands, and it does. It really does hurt those brands. But it also affects the animal. If they go without treatment because the vet wants to just go with the flavor of the week, then they can die.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one knows, you can't know why these articles were published. But I have a theory, and it's one that really bothers me. So, those articles were published by Tufts University. And if you look at the sponsors of Tufts University, Hills and Nestle are both sponsors. And right at the beginning of 2019, only about a month or 2 after these articles were published, it turned out that Hills had sent out a whole bunch of food containing dangerous levels of vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's actually leading to dogs dying because of it.
Yeah, there was actually thousands of deaths. They sent out 13.5 million cans with deadly levels of vitamin D. This actually led to a civil suit. I'm just trying to see if they said, there's 57 countries at least affected by this. Thousands of animals died, and so it's not just Hills that was affected by this, it was everyone manufactured in the same facility. The thing is, every other brand recalled in January. Hills did a partial recall in March and a partial recall in May. So I'm very concerned that Hills may have pushed the DCM issue in order to
damage control, basically.
Yeah, to distract people from the fact that their food killed thousands of animals. Because typically Dr. Freeman says, oh, well, you should switch to Hills. And if you think about that, you'd say, so you want me to switch from a food that theoretically has killed 50, 60 dogs to a food who has definitively killed thousands. And it just doesn't make any sense. I hope that's not the reason. I hope that these vets were just seeing a trend and
trying to report it.
Yeah, making some sort of weird correlation, but it really wouldn't surprise me if this was just a couple of people that received money from Hills that were doing damage control for them, and it's sad. So I hope you come away with this with a better understanding that you don't have to avoid foods with no grain. Just look for the healthiest thing that you can afford, the healthiest thing that makes sense for your animal. And don't care if it has grains or not, unless your animal has a gluten intolerance or something like that.
Also, this is a really good example of don't just believe everything that you hear, especially from your vet on the news. Do your research.
Yeah, make sure that there's a because. We spent a lot of time arguing with followers of Dr. Stern, who was part of this. He had a Facebook group, and they would attack anyone who spoke out against this article. We spent a lot of time disproving facts that they spewed, and a lot of the time it took 2 minutes of research. It would be something as simple as, well, you should feed a corn-based food because lentils are high in pantothenic acid. Well, that's ignoring the fact that a food like Origin will be 10% lentils and a food like Royal Canin will be 90% corn. But if you go and you Google which one has higher pantothenic acid, it's corn.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff out there that make no sense.
Yeah, the things that they were arguing weren't even true, so. Yeah.
So please do research. Don't just blindly follow things like this. And do know, we know manufacturers. These small ones take this seriously.
Yeah.
This is their livelihoods. This is their kids' college funds. This is the food on their plates. It's not the same as shareholders. So please give a lot of credit to the ones that are working their butts off, trying to make the best product they can. Thank you. Bye.